Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of the 13 books that I read in 2020. If you're coming from the first video, thanks for coming back. And if you're new and you just clicked on this video because it was recommended or you found it in some other way, I recommend that you watch the first video, which I'll put a link to up top. Because that's where I kind of explained, how much of the book I'm going over, whether there's spoilers or not. And I don't want to repeat that in this intro because I want to save time, so I'm just going to get right into it. Alright, flying way back into kind of history territory here, we have Sarum, the Novel of England by Edward Rutherford, published in 1987. And so in September I read Sarum, and the book is a historical fiction. It has a pretty unique premise. It follows 5 families throughout the history of England, specifically the Sarum region, which is where modern-day Salisbury is. And it begins in prehistoric times and goes right up until the 1980s, which was when this book was released. And each chapter or set of chapters follows a new set of characters who are the descendants of those in the previous chapter. So obviously they do time skip in order to get to interesting events. They do not go through every single generation. Some notable historical events covered are the arrival of the prehistoric people to Sarum, the building of Stonehenge, the arrival and departure of the Romans, the Viking invasion, the Black Death, the English Civil War, the British Imperial period, and the World Wars. So this is a great book if you're a history buff, but if you aren't, it probably won't appeal to you as much. It can sometimes spend a lot of time describing things almost like a history book would. Obviously still, fitting in with the narrative, but for example, they talk about Stonehenge being built. They kind of describe how the stones were moved in the context of the story, and how certain forts and historical buildings were built. I really enjoyed this stuff because I'm a history nerd. But I know that some people will get really bored of it, right? And that's okay, it's just a matter of preference, so you're gonna have to come into this book knowing that that is there, right? Each chapter is its own self-contained story within the larger story, right? So you'll kind of have, new characters introduced, and then they'll have like a little story, right, about them. The stories at the beginning of the book aren't really going to be related to the ones at the end, except for the broader general themes that he's talking about. But anyway, since each one is a self-contained story, they can actually be pretty long, right? Because it's like a short story. So some of them chapters are like 60 to 100 pages. So for that reason, I did actually find this pretty hard to get into initially. But for people who love history, I would definitely recommend it. Even though it might be daunting for others, right? This is a thick book. It's about 900 pages. So yeah, if you like history, check it out. And check out his other works, because he does similar works to this one if you do like this one. So he has one like on Moscow, right? He has one on New York. So that might be, I'm definitely looking forward to reading those, and you might want to read them too. Number 8 is The Three-Body Problem by Shixin Liu. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I don't know how to speak Chinese, but I'm trying to pronounce that right. It was published in 2008, and this is a kind of alien first contact type book. It's part of a series, so I don't think I'm going to talk about it too much, because I would like to read the other books in the series as well first. So I can't really offer my opinion on the series as a whole, but I really enjoyed this book, and I am looking forward to reading the next ones. Kind of the intro to it is it takes place in China, and it takes place over multiple time periods that kind of go back and forth in the narrative, right? It's not set up chronologically. So it describes alien first contact during the 1960s and the Cultural Revolution in China, and kind of throughout the rest of the book in the modern period, it describes how the aliens basically are beginning to invade Earth, right? It doesn't necessarily happen per se in this book, but the way in which they do it, the aliens that is very unique. I haven't actually seen this kind of concept done in science fiction. It's a very interesting way for aliens to start to take over our planet. As opposed to traditional means. So that's all I'm going to say about it. I'm really excited to read the next books in the saga, and yeah, definitely good. I would recommend it if you're into sci-fi. It's very good, and I didn't have any issues with the translation, right? It was originally in Chinese. Didn't have any issues with the translation. It made a lot of sense. The only issues was with names, but there's a glossary too for us English speakers. Next up, we have The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, published in 1962. So this book is set in an alternate reality 1960s where Franklin D. Roosevelt was assassinated in 1933, and this led to the Great Depression being extended and higher US isolationism at the beginning of World War II. And as a result, Nazi Germany and Japan ended up actually winning the war and conquering most of the globe. So, from there, that's a pretty good intro to the book, right? That definitely piques my interest. The US is fractured. Japan occupies the West Coast, setting up the Pacific States of America, while the East Coast is divided into two puppet states, one just called the South, and another is basically the United States, but controlled by a puppet government. And between these two empires is a weak and undeveloped neutral buffer state called the Rocky Mountain States, right? It's a classical thing where, two superpowers set up a boundary between them so they don't fight. The book follows several groups of characters as they make their way through this world, exploring themes of identity, alternate realities, and fate, right? Fate is a huge part of this book, and like exploring each character's identity. So much so that, honestly, it's set in alternate history, and alternate history kind of provides a lot of the conflict in the book, a lot of the inciting incidents, but it's really not about alternate history so much as exploring those concepts. This book got my attention because I was originally a fan of the show adaptation made by Amazon. However, that show started to drag on and be really boring after season 1 in my opinion, so I stopped watching it. I can't remember where I saw it, but somewhere on Reddit someone was talking about the book and how it was significantly different and better, so I decided to pick it up. I mean, I was going to read it anyway, but that really kind of prodded me a little bit more to do it. After reading the book, I definitely think it would have been better if they had made a movie for the Man in the High Castle adaptation, instead of dragging it out on a TV show, because I feel like there was like a lot of dead air time in the TV show, honestly. Like, it didn't need to have a lot of those episodes. And normally, it's kind of weird, because normally it's the opposite, where I would love books to be adapted into TV shows so that they have more time to go through their complex and deeper plots, rather than being in a quick movie and compressed into 2 hours. But this is like one of the rare chances where I'm like, no, just do it in 2 hours, right? So that was interesting for me. That's kind of off topic though. So back to the actual book. I liked it, but I feel like the ending of the book kind of fell a little bit flat, at least for me. Things pick up towards the climax, but resolve in a way that I wouldn't describe as unsatisfactory, because in relation to the themes, I understand why those choices were made. But I just have this feeling that there could have been a few more chapters there, really, to close it off a little bit better. I think this is partially because Dick planned to write a sequel for the book, but he never really started that project. I think if you are interested in the show or in alternate history in general, that you should give this a read, but I can't really recommend it to people who are impartial to those categories. Like, it's not something that's going to break the mold for you and kind of be like, wow, I suddenly like this now. Like, I suddenly like this genre that I don't typically like. I can't recommend it for those type of people, but if you are somebody like me, I definitely would recommend this for you. It's alright. So the next one here, number 10, is a little bit of an odd choice for me, because I don't really like horror in general. I don't really read horror books. I don't really like watching horror movies. But I do, as I mentioned before, like reading the classics, and this is definitely a horror classic. So some of you might have guessed it's either like Edgar Allan Poe or Lovecraft. And if you were guessing Lovecraft, then you are right, the Lovecraft Compendium. Obviously, this is not like produced, this book itself is not produced by Lovecraft. It's like a compendium of 5 of his stories. And those 5 stories are Dagon, The Call of Cthulhu, Dunwich Horror, and The Whisper in the Darkness, and The Haunter in the Dark, which I believe are some of the more classic stories. I know that a few of them are like really essential to the Cthulhu mythos. Since there are 5 books here, I'm not going to do what I did for the other books, like give an introduction for each of the stories, but I'm just going to kind of talk about Lovecraft in general and what I liked about this compendium. So Lovecraft obviously is hugely, I should say, influential on modern horror, and he kind of carved out the genre of cosmic horror by himself, if I remember correctly. Like, he's a huge inspiration for games that I like Darkest Dungeon, which I plan to do a review on. And if you aren't a horror person, don't like being scared, I feel like these are still pretty enjoyable. Like, I don't really like horror. It's not like these are jump scary or gory. It's more of like an unsettling feeling of dread, right? The concepts he presents are what's scary. Like, thinking about these concepts give you goosebumps, right? That's the idea here. So some of the ideas that he plays with is like the idea that there are these beings out there that are like gods or magical beings to us. We'd only be able to understand them as gods or having dark magical powers. And the fact that they don't even care potentially about crushing or manipulating us is what's terrifying. We can't even understand them. Our minds would break if we try to understand them. We go insane. Or that, you know, in the hidden remote places, the deep dark forests of the world, these things are hiding there, and they might have some grand plans for us that we don't even understand yet, and they're hiding there in the darkness waiting to enact them. That's what's kind of scary, right? Like that you could go into the woods and, you know, maybe you'd come across one of these things, or you'd go into the sea and you'd maybe come across, you know, a giant sea squid man that wants to destroy your mind and eat you. That's the crazy thing, right? So a lot of the antagonists in these works are like alien entities that we would perceive as gods because of their power, right? And, you know, I'm into sci-fi, you know, I've already made that clear. So I kind of understand that, like, this idea, how he presents these aliens is maybe not as realistic as what our perception of the universe is, how we understand the universe now. Like, we're fairly certain if there was an advanced civilization in space near us, there would be telltale signs of them manipulating, like, stellar objects. You know, they would be, if there were aliens this powerful, we would be able to see their, like, Dyson spheres. You know, they probably wouldn't be able to travel to us as easily as he says, you know, like, there's a speed of light and stuff, while in Lovecraft, they, like, sail the sea like an ocean, and they fly with wings. Like, that doesn't really make sense, but it's still, like, you can suspend your disbelief, and the concepts that Lovecraft evokes are still extremely enticing to think about, and they still, like, invoke that horror, even though, like, if you kind of understand, like, how physics and, like, you know, interstellar exploration would work, like, it's a little bit unrealistic, it's still interesting, it's still scary, and it's still interesting. Good stuff. All right, we're getting to the end here. So the last major one I'm going to say, once you see the next two, is The Tale of Two Cities, A Tale of Two Cities, by Charles Dickens. And this one, I have to stand to correct myself, my previous statement. This one is definitely the oldest book that I've read. This was written in 1959. So being a historical fiction, it's set prior to and during the French Revolution. There is a time skip during the first part, like this book takes place over 30 years, but there's a time skip. In London and Paris. The struggle between the rich nobles of France and the poor of France, again, threatens to tear apart the happiness of the exiled ex-nobleman Charles Darnay and his wife Lucy Minette, who is also another exile from France. And through the you know, happenings of the book, you know, they wind up back in France and trouble ensues. Dickens is basically criticizing both revolutionary excesses and the aristocratic tyranny and abuse of the people that described the social conditions that led to the French Revolution. The struggles and abuse of the poor while rich nobles prospered, right? But he doesn't shy away from depicting the ravages of mob violence present during the revolution as well. So kind of in my research for this review, I did see that some sources were saying that, like, he does over-exaggerate it a little bit, like if we compared to what we look at in historical, more historical accounts. But I still think it's like a good warning, you know? It's a good warning. And I think he was saying some pretty good stuff in this book. So this one was a little bit hard for me to get into at first because it's written in an older style of English prose. And sometimes the way things are phrased can force you to reread passages to make sure that you understand what they're saying. And honestly, there's still some passages where I'm a little bit like, what does that even mean? So if you're not a native English speaker or just struggle with reading in general, this might be a challenge for you. You might want to avoid this one. But if you're definitely up for the challenge, I think you should definitely read it because it's a classic. Yeah, so be warned. But once I got past that, and especially during the last 100 pages of the book, I was really engaged in the story, which kind of took me off guard, since, you know, for the first 2/3, there were some sections which were pretty dry, and I was really happy to find that, like, in the end, I was really reading it, I couldn't put the book down, and I was definitely surprised at the ending, despite it being a little bit of Chekhov's gun. I don't want to say it's a cliche, but it was definitely a Chekhov's gun that I missed, and I think I missed it probably because of the language difficulties that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I was surprised at that, and I was pleasantly surprised, to be sure. This is definitely a good book if you like historical fiction, or history in general, and are interested in the time period. Actually, I finished university recently, and one of my last classes was a class about the French Revolution. So to see some of the stuff that I learned in university at play here was personally rewarding. I don't know how many people are going to be in the same situation though. So the next 2 books in this are quite easy reading. You know, they're stuff that you'd put on top of the toilet and read while taking a crap. Not to say they're bad, they're more like trivia books, right? So, because I got them in the Trivia Night Done Right book bundle on Humble Bundle, which I recommend you check out. They do have some good stuff. I think I'm going to be planning to do a review of the next bundle. But there were like 20 ebooks in this bundle, and these 2 weren't really the ones I got it for, but I just decided to read them anyway. I wanted something easy to read during the holidays. This was at the tail end of the year, during December. So yeah, that's kind of why. So the first one is Cats Don't Always Land on Their Feet. Where am I putting this? Cats Don't Always Land on Their Feet. Hundreds of Fascinating Facts from the Cat World by Aaron Barrett and Jack Mingo. And so I read this one lately because I've become more of a cat person, and I thought some more cool cat facts would be nice to learn. I used to be a dog person, but now I would say I'm somewhat neutral, right? My roommate fosters cats, so I've gotten a lot more comfortable with them now, and I was like, well, you know, might as well learn some more facts, right? The book was nice. I don't really remember much, but do you know if a cat's tail is whipping back and forth, they're actually angry, not happy like a dog? I didn't know that till now. The next one is a little bit more serious. It's Back from the Future, a celebration of the greatest time travel story ever told by Brad Gilmore. And this one was interesting. I like Back to the Future. I've only seen 1 and 2, but you know, they're classic movies, right? So this book was written by a huge fan of the series, and it basically covers the production of the movies and some of the lesser known animated material and stuff within the Back to the Future universe, and goes over the potential futures for the series. I thought the part about the production of the movies was the most interesting. I really liked the behind the scenes perspective, right? This guy obviously did a lot of research, he really cares about it. The rest of the book was alright, but it did not really capture me because I'm not the biggest fan of Back to the Future. If you are, I'm sure this one will be interesting for you, but this was like somebody who trying to explain Clone Wars to a person who's not a Star Wars fan. Trust me, I've had that experience so many times, and I was like on the opposite end of it. I totally understand why when I start talking about Clone Wars, some people just go whoosh. So yeah, that's definitely that aspect of the book not so great. Well, that about wraps it up. I have no more books to talk about, and I don't want to drag this video on any longer than it needs to go. So hopefully I gave you some ideas for future reading, or you just like listening to me talk about books, because I love talking about books, I love reading. I'm planning to make a video similar to this for January, because I read a decent amount of books in January compared to my normal amount of reading. So please stay tuned for that. And if you liked the video, please like, favorite, and subscribe, because I put a lot of effort into this, and it really helps me out. Alright guys, I'll see you on the next one. Tim Trout.